Evelyn Reed despised loose ends. They were untidy entries on a balance sheet, small smudges of red ink that, while individually insignificant, collectively represented a failure of decisiveness. Her world, a silent expanse of glass and brushed steel 37 floors above the city, was a monument to the elimination of such untidiness. From this perch, she commanded mergers, orchestrated acquisitions, and dismantled corporate relics with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon excising benign but useless tissue. Her thoughts were not in words but in percentages, in quarterly projections, in the clean, upward trajectory of a stock chart. Her tailored suit was armor, its sharp lines a declaration of intent. Her gaze, when it fell upon a subordinate, was a tool of measurement, assessing utility and finding it, more often than not, wanting. Today's loose end was a property designated only as Lot 7G in the portfolio of a recent acquisition. It was a derelict workshop in an industrial park that time and zoning laws had forgotten. The holding company she had just absorbed had acquired it decades ago and done nothing with it. It was a drain. Property taxes, minimal security, insurance, a steady, annoying trickle of expenses. Her assistant, Marcus Thorne, stood silently by her desk, holding a tablet displaying the property's meager file. He was young, sharp, and possessed a useful, if sometimes irritating, attention to detail. "It's a complete write-off," she stated, not asking. Her voice was as crisp as a new banknote. "The land value is negligible until the city rezones, which could be a decade away. The structure itself is a liability." Environmental assessment flagged potential contaminants from old machining oils. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her desk, a sound like a single, impatient tick of a clock. "What's the demolition quote?" Marcus swiped the screen. $120,000, ma'am. That includes hazardous material disposal. Evelyn's lips thinned. $120,000 to get rid of a property worth maybe half that if we're lucky. Unacceptable. Find another way. I want it off the books by the end of the quarter. I don't care how. Sell it for $1 if you have to. Just make the liability disappear. Marcus hesitated, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "There is an old inventory manifest. It's incomplete, mostly handwritten from the 1980s. It lists some industrial equipment. Lathes, milling machines. It's all listed as scrap value, but perhaps we could auction it." "Scrap," Evelyn repeated, the word tasting like rust in her mouth. "You want me to authorize the time and expense of an industrial auction for a few tons of scrap metal that will fetch pennies on the dollar?" "No. The directive is simple, Marcus. Get rid of it. Find some local salvage operator. Offer it as a single lot, contents included. As is, where is. Quick, clean, final." She turned her chair back toward the window, the city lights a glittering field of conquered territory. The conversation, and Lot 7G with it, was already fading from her mind. It was a problem delegated, which was the same as a problem solved. 30 miles away, in a world of concrete floors and the lingering scent of solvent, Elias Vance moved with an unhurried grace. His domain was a small, immaculately organized garage behind his modest house. Every tool hung in its designated place, a silhouette painted on the pegboard behind it. Every drawer of bolts and washers was meticulously labeled. It was a sanctuary of order, a place where problems had physical form and solutions could be wrought from steel and patience. He was rebuilding the transmission of a vintage motorcycle, his hands, stained with grease that soap could never fully conquer, moving with the certainty of a master craftsman. His flannel shirt was worn soft at the elbows, his work boots scuffed but solid. He was a quiet man in a quiet place, and he preferred it that way. The back door of the house opened, and his daughter, Lily, stepped into the garage. She was 8 years old, with her father's serious eyes and a quiet watchfulness that made her seem older. She did not run or shout but walked to the workbench and placed a plate with a sandwich, cut into perfect triangles, beside a cleared space. She then took her place on a stool he had built for her, a book open on her lap. This was their ritual, a silent communion that needed no words. He was her anchor, and she, his entire world. He finished tightening a bolt to a precise torque specification, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and picked up half of the sandwich. He ate slowly, methodically, his gaze resting on the complex assembly of gears before him. The work was his meditation. It was a language he understood more deeply than spoken words. In the precise meshing of gears, in the exact tolerance of a bearing, there was a truth and an honesty he had not found in the world of men and their ambitions. He had once lived in that other world, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Now, his world was this garage, this house, and the small, serious girl reading on her stool. And for him, it was enough. Elias Vance had not always lived a life measured by the turn of a wrench. There was a time when his name was spoken with a kind of hushed reverence in the most demanding engineering circles in the country. He had been the lead systems engineer at Aerodyne Dynamics, a legendary but ill-fated firm that had pursued perfection with a reckless disregard for cost. They built engines that were more akin to Swiss watches, marvels of mechanical harmony that were too expensive and complex for mass production. Elias had been their prodigy. He held 3 patents for metallurgical bonding processes and had designed the lubrication system for the Peregrine V12, an engine that existed more in myth than reality, a prototype so advanced and powerful it was deemed commercially unviable. He had a mind that could see the intricate dance of moving parts in 4 dimensions, intuiting stress points and harmonic frequencies before any computer simulation could model them. His colleagues from that era remembered a man who was quiet then, too, but his silence was different. It was the silence of intense concentration, of a mind operating on a plane few could access. He commanded teams not with speeches but with concise, undeniable logic, sketching complex diagrams on a whiteboard that left seasoned engineers in silent awe. He wore a lab coat then, not flannel, and his hands were clean, manipulating CAD models instead of greasy components. He had a wife, Elena, a woman whose laughter was the bright, vibrant counterpoint to his quiet intensity. They were a perfect balance. Then the balance had been shattered. Aerodyne Dynamics, in its stubborn pursuit of engineering purity, hemorrhaged money. It was swallowed whole by a massive, soulless conglomerate, the very one Evelyn Reed now helped manage. The acquisition was brutal. Divisions were shuttered, projects cancelled, and brilliant minds scattered to the winds. Elias, seeing the methodical dismantling of everything he had helped build, was offered a lucrative but creatively sterile management position. He saw the future, endless meetings, budget justifications, and the slow death of innovation. He was preparing to resign when the second blow fell, the one from which he would never fully recover. A car accident on a rain-slicked road took Elena from him, leaving him with a shattered heart and a 2-year-old daughter who needed him more than any engine ever could. The choice, in the end, had been no choice at all. The world of corporate engineering, with its 80-hour workweeks and consuming ambition, had no place for a single father whose only priority was his child. So he had walked away. He cashed out his stock options, bought the small house with the big garage, and vanished from the world that had known his name. He became a ghost, a legend spoken of in the past tense. He built a new life, a smaller, more deliberate one, centered on Lily. He found that the same principles that governed the creation of a perfect engine, patience, precision, and intolerance for mediocrity, also applied to raising a child and fixing a motorcycle. The scale was different, but the integrity of the work remained the same. His only remaining link to that former life was David Chen. David had been a junior engineer at Aerodyne, a brilliant programmer who had worked under Elias on the Peregrine's control systems. He had revered Elias, not just for his genius, but for his unwavering calm and integrity. Unlike Elias, David had adapted to the new corporate landscape. He had founded a successful software company, but he never forgot the man who had been his mentor. They spoke once a month, their conversations a comfortable mixture of technical talk and updates on Lily's progress. David was the only one who truly understood the magnitude of the talent lying dormant in that suburban garage. "You're wasting it, Elias," David had said during their last call, a familiar refrain. "You could be running the R&D division of any company you choose. You could name your price." Elias had been cleaning a carburetor at the time, holding the small brass jets up to the light. "Lily started 3rd grade last week," he had replied, which was his way of saying everything that needed to be said. "She needs me to be here when she gets off the bus. A promotion can't do that." David had sighed, a sound of frustrated affection traveling through the phone. "I know. I get it. But if you ever change your mind, if you ever need anything, the offer is always there. Capital, legal, anything. Just say the word." "I know, David," Elias had said, his voice quiet but full of gratitude. "Thank you." He had hung up and returned to his work, the thought of that other world receding like a distant tide. He did not long for it. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house was still, he would feel a phantom limb, an echo of the challenge, the ache of a part of his mind left unused, a powerful engine running at idle. The notice appeared on a drab county website, a place Elias browsed occasionally for surplus equipment auctions. It was listed under commercial liquidations. The entry was brief, clinical, and clearly written by someone with no knowledge of its contents. Lot 7G, Industrial Workshop and Contents. As is, where is. Sale by sealed bid. Minimum bid, $1,000. The address was familiar. It was the old Aerodyne Dynamics prototyping facility, a place Elias knew like the back of his hand. It had been their skunk works, the secure building where they had worked on their most secret and ambitious projects. The conglomerate had shuttered it immediately after the takeover, deeming it redundant. A cold stillness settled over Elias. He clicked on the grainy photo attached to the listing. It showed a drab, windowless concrete building, its roll-up door rusted shut, weeds cracking the asphalt in front of it. To anyone else, it was an eyesore, a liability. To Elias, it was a time capsule. He knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, what was likely still inside. While the main factories had been stripped, the prototyping shop had been sealed in a hurry during the chaotic transition. They had been working on something in there, something revolutionary. He drove there the next morning. The industrial park was a ghost town, a relic of a more prosperous era. He parked his old, reliable truck across the street from Lot 7G. He didn't get out. He just sat and looked, his mind working, piecing together memories. He remembered the layout, the placement of the heavy machinery, the location of the secure storage cage in the back corner. He remembered the arguments with the finance department, the late nights fueled by coffee and obsession. He remembered the smell of coolant and hot metal. He remembered the day they had powered it up for the first and only time. He called David that afternoon. "I need a cashier's check for $1,000, he said, without preamble. "And I need you to set up a shell corporation for me. Something simple, anonymous." David didn't ask why. He simply said, "Give me an hour." "What do you want to call the company?" Elias looked around his garage, at the clean, orderly space he had built. "Call it Vance Precision," he said. The transaction was as dismissive as Evelyn Reed could have hoped. Marcus Thorne was tasked with handling the sale personally, a sign of its utter insignificance. He met the buyer in a sterile conference room at a satellite office, a place devoid of any character. The man who walked in was not what he expected. He wore simple work clothes and carried a worn leather briefcase. He said nothing, simply placed the briefcase on the table and slid a single envelope across the polished surface. His name, according to the paperwork, was Elias Vance, representing a company called Vance Precision. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $1,001 and a single signed sheet of paper accepting all terms and liabilities. The extra dollar felt deliberate. He looked at the men across the table. Vance's face was calm, his expression unreadable. There was no flicker of excitement, no sign that he felt he was getting a bargain. He just sat there, waiting patiently. "Mr. Vance," Marcus began, feeling an odd, inexplicable need to fill the silence. "You understand this is an as-is sale. The property is sold with all faults. Our company makes no warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the condition of the structure or its contents. You assume all responsibility for environmental remediation, security, everything." Elias Vance simply nodded. A junior associate from the legal department, a young man eager to impress, snickered quietly. "He's paying $1,000 for a teardown full of junk," he whispered to his colleague, just loud enough for the room to hear. "Boss lady will be happy we got that off the books." Marcus felt a prickle of shame. There was a stillness about Vance, a deep well of competence, that the lawyers in their sharp suits failed to perceive. They saw a simple mechanic, a salvage operator. Marcus saw something else, something he couldn't quite name. He pushed the pre-signed deed and transfer documents across the table. "Sign here and here." Elias took a pen from his pocket, a simple, heavy, all-metal drafting pen. He signed his name with clean, precise strokes. The signature was not a scribble, it was an act of deliberate construction. He slid the papers back, took his copy, and stood up. He had not spoken a single word during the entire exchange. He gave a final, brief nod to Marcus and walked out of the room. The lawyers chuckled as the door closed. "I can't believe someone was dumb enough to pay for that headache," one of them said. Marcus Thorne said nothing. He looked down at the cashier's check for $1,001 and felt a profound sense of unease, a cold certainty that his company, in its infinite wisdom, had just made a terrible, monumental mistake. He just didn't know what it was yet. The keys felt heavy in Elias's hand. They were old, brass, and cut with a complexity that spoke of a time when security was mechanical, not electronic. He stood before the rusted roll-up door of Lot 7G, the silence of the abandoned industrial park pressing in on him. Lily was with him, standing a few feet back, her expression as serious as his own. He had explained to her that this was a new project, a big one. She had simply nodded, trusting him implicitly. He bypassed the main door, walking to a smaller, reinforced personnel door on the side of the building. The key slid into the lock with a grating sound. It resisted, seized by years of neglect. Elias didn't force it. He took a small canister of penetrating oil from his truck, sprayed it carefully into the keyway, and waited. He understood mechanisms. He knew that patience was a more effective tool than brute force. After 5 minutes, he tried again. The lock turned with a series of loud, satisfying clicks, the sound of a tomb being opened. He pushed the heavy steel door inward. The air that rolled out was cold, stale, and thick with the scent of dormant machinery, the ghosts of oil, metal, and ozone. He flipped a series of heavy-duty breaker switches on the wall, and after a moment's hesitation, a third of the overhead fluorescent lights flickered to life, humming loudly in the profound silence. The sight before him made his breath catch in his chest. It was exactly as he remembered, a perfect time capsule of Aerodyne's ambition. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but beneath it, the shapes were unmistakable. A massive 5-axis CNC mill stood like a monolith in the center of the room. A state-of-the-art metallurgical lathe, a wire EDM machine, precision grinders, millions of dollars worth of the finest German and Swiss tooling, all left behind because it was too specialized and costly to move. To the conglomerate's accountants, it was scrap. To Elias, it was a world-class machine shop waiting to be awakened. But that wasn't the real prize. He walked toward the back of the workshop, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Lily followed, her small hand finding his. In the far corner was a heavy-gauge steel cage, its door secured with a formidable combination lock. Elias walked to it, his heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the schematics, the late-night sessions, the arguments. He remembered the combination. It was a sequence of prime numbers, a small joke from the head of mathematics. His fingers, calloused from years of physical work, moved with practiced delicacy over the dial. He turned it right, then left, then right again. The final number clicked into place, and he pulled the handle. The heavy door swung open without a sound. Inside the cage, on a heavy-duty engine stand and shrouded by a thick, custom-fitted canvas tarp, was the reason he had risked everything. It was a shape he had seen 1,000 times in his dreams. He reached out, his hand steady, and pulled back the corner of the tarp. Dust motes danced in the beams of light. Beneath the canvas was the Peregrine V12. It was not a mock-up or a partial assembly. It was the fully completed, operational prototype. Its magnesium alloy block and carbon fiber intakes gleamed even under the thick dust. It was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, a power plant capable of producing over 2,000 horsepower with the smoothness of an electric motor. There was only one in the world, and it was his. But even the engine was not the true treasure. In a fireproof cabinet next to it, he knew he would find the complete set of manufacturing schematics, the material specifications, the proprietary software for the control unit, and the custom tooling jigs. He had not just bought a workshop full of scrap, he had bought the entire intellectual property, the very soul, of Aerodyne's greatest achievement. The deed he had signed gave him ownership of the building and its contents. There was no clause excluding intellectual property. It was a loophole born of pure, unadulterated arrogance. They hadn't even bothered to look. He let the tarp fall back into place. He turned to Lily, who was looking up at him, her eyes wide with a question she didn't know how to ask. He knelt down so he was at her level. "We have a lot of work to do," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with a purpose that had been dormant for a decade. The first calls he made were not to investors or lawyers, but to three men he had not spoken to in years. The first was Marco, a master machinist in his late 60s who had been forcibly retired after the takeover. He could coax tolerances of less than a micron out of a 30-year-old lathe. The second was Ben, a quiet, meticulous fabricator who could weld anything from titanium to aluminum foil with the precision of a surgeon. The third was Sam, the grizzled, cynical head of quality control who had quit in disgust when the new management replaced his precision measurement tools with a good enough policy. He didn't offer them jobs. He offered them a project. He sent them each a single photo of the workshop, followed by a text, Lot 7G. It's all here. Interested? Marco called back within 5 minutes, his voice thick with emotion. I'll be there tomorrow. Ben replied with a simple, what time? Sam showed up at the gate 2 hours later with his personal set of calipers in his pocket. They were a small, graying team, men cast aside by a world that valued youth and speed over experience and mastery. They walked through the silent workshop like men returning to a lost home. There were no contracts, no salary negotiations. Their payment was the work itself, the chance to once again create something of uncompromising quality. They were drawn to the project by the same force that drew Elias, a deep, abiding respect for the integrity of a well-made thing. The work began not with a bang, but with a quiet, methodical process of reclamation. For the first week, they did nothing but clean. They swept away a decade of dust and neglect. They scrubbed the floors, cleaned the light fixtures, and serviced the building's ventilation system. Elias insisted on it. An orderly environment, he believed, was essential for orderly work. Lily spent her afternoons after school doing her homework at a small desk they set up for her in the clean, quiet office, the low hum of machinery a comforting backdrop to her studies. Then came the resurrection of the machines. Elias and his team disassembled each piece of equipment. They cleaned every gear, replaced every belt, calibrated every sensor. They drained old fluids and replaced them with fresh, high-grade synthetics. Elias moved between the machines, his hands directing the work, his quiet presence a constant source of guidance. He diagnosed a failing bearing in the CNC mill by sound alone, and located a hairline crack in a hydraulic line with a gentle touch. It was a slow, painstaking process. There was no rush, only a shared commitment to doing it right. They spoke little, communicating instead through the shared language of their craft, a nod, a gesture, the quiet presentation of the correct tool at the correct moment. While his team restored the shop, Elias focused on the Peregrine. He spent days doing nothing but studying it, cross-referencing the physical engine with the schematics he had found in the fireproof cabinet. His mind, dormant for so long, came alive. The complex interplay of its systems, the elegant solutions to intractable engineering problems, it all came flooding back to him. He had designed much of it, but now, with a decade of distance, he could see it with fresh eyes. He saw not only its genius, but also its flaws, the small compromises they had been forced to make under budget and time pressures. He saw how to make it better. He began to make notes, sketching modifications on fresh sheets of drafting paper with his old mechanical pencil. A revised oil pump design for better high-G lubrication. A new alloy for the valve springs to improve thermal resistance. A refined fuel injector pattern for more efficient atomization. He was not just restoring the engine, he was completing it, elevating it from a brilliant prototype to a perfect, finished product. The work consumed him, but it was not the frantic, stressful work of his old life. It was calm, focused, and deeply satisfying. It was the work he had been born to do. The first major milestone was reached after 2 months of relentless, quiet effort. The 5-axis mill, a machine worth more than a luxury car, hummed back to life. Marco, his hands moving with the familiarity of decades, programmed a test sequence. The massive cutting head moved with silent, fluid grace, carving a complex shape from a block of aluminum with a precision that was breathtaking. When it finished, Sam approached the piece with his digital calipers. He measured it, then measured it again. He looked up at Elias, a rare glimmer of a smile touching his lips. Dead on, he said. Perfect, it was the highest praise he was capable of giving. One by one, the machines in the workshop awakened from their long slumber, each one restored not just to working order, but to a state of perfection that exceeded its original factory specifications. Vance Precision was no longer a shell company with a derelict asset. It was a functioning, world-class engineering and fabrication facility, owned free and clear. With the shop fully operational, the focus shifted entirely to the engine. The team, under Elias's direction, began the meticulous process of fabricating the new components he had designed. The sounds of the workshop changed, from the quiet whir of maintenance to the purposeful bite of cutting tools into metal. It was the sound of creation. Elias did not rush. Every new part was machined, tested, measured by Sam, and only then, if it was deemed flawless, was it set aside for the final assembly. 6 months after he had first unlocked the door, the day came. The modified Peregrine V12, now designated the P12S, sat on a custom-built test stand in the center of the workshop. It was no longer a dusty relic but a gleaming piece of industrial art. Every hose was new, every clamp polished. It was connected to a sophisticated dynamometer and a bank of sensors that David Chin had helped Elias acquire and program. Elias, Marco, Ben, and Sam stood around the engine. Lily watched from the safety of the office doorway. No one spoke. Elias performed the final systems check, his eyes scanning a laptop screen filled with data. Everything was nominal. He looked at his team, and they each gave him a solemn nod. He took a deep breath and pressed a single button on the laptop. A fuel pump whined to life. A starter motor engaged with a soft whir, and then, with a deep, resonant roar that shook the very concrete beneath their feet, the P12S ignited. It was not the harsh, deafening blast of a racing engine, but a smooth, impossibly deep thrum, a sound of immense, controlled power. It settled into a steady, rock-solid idle at 900 revolutions per minute. The numbers on the laptop screen were perfect. Oil pressure, stable. Coolant temperature, rising slowly and evenly. Exhaust gas temperatures, balanced across all 12 cylinders. Elias let it run for 10 minutes, watching the data, listening to the sound. It was flawless. He slowly increased the throttle. The engine's note deepened, a powerful baritone that resonated in their chests, but there was no vibration. A coin placed on its edge on the engine block would not have fallen over. He ran it up to 5,000 revolutions per minute, the power output climbing steadily on the dynamometer display, far exceeding the original prototype's numbers. The sound was intoxicating. It was the sound of vindication. He brought it back down to idle and, after a cool-down period, shut it down. The silence that followed was profound. The four men looked at each other, the shared understanding of what they had accomplished passing between them. They had not just restored an engine. They had resurrected a dream. The first client was not found through advertising or marketing. Vance Precision had no website, no sales department. The client found them through a whisper network of engineers and ultra-high-end restorers, a rumor of a ghost from Aerodyne who had resurfaced with something extraordinary. The client was a reclusive Swiss billionaire, a man who collected not cars, but significant engines. He had heard the legends of the Peregrine V12 for years. When he heard it might actually exist, he dispatched his chief engineer, a stern German named Klaus, to investigate. Klaus arrived at the unremarkable workshop expecting to expose a fraud. He was met at the door by Elias. Klaus, accustomed to dealing with fawning salesmen, was taken aback by Elias's quiet, direct manner. He was led into the workshop, where the P12S sat on its stand. Klaus spent the next 3 hours examining the engine. He used a digital borescope to inspect the cylinder walls. He took oil samples. He scrutinized the welds on the exhaust manifold. He asked Elias a series of deeply technical questions, each one designed to be a trap. Elias answered every question with calm, factual precision, at one point sketching a complex fluid dynamics diagram on a whiteboard to illustrate a point about the modified oiling system. Finally, Klaus asked for a demonstration. Elias started the engine. He ran it through a full diagnostic cycle on the dynamometer, the results displayed on a large monitor. Klaus watched the screen, his stern expression slowly melting away, replaced by one of open, unadulterated awe. The power figures, the thermal efficiency, the smoothness, it was all beyond the realm of what he thought was possible for a piston engine. When Elias shut it down, Klaus was silent for a full minute. He walked over to the engine, placing a hand almost reverently on the cool valve cover. "It is not an engine," Klaus said, his German accent thick. "It is a work of art. My employer will want it. He will also want 2 more, built to these exact specifications. Name your price. Elias had already discussed the numbers with David Chen. He knew the value of what he had. It was not just an engine, it was a unique, irreplicable piece of engineering history, now perfected. He looked at Klaus. The price for this one is $6 million, Elias said, his voice even. The price for the next two will be $7 million each, with 50% due up front. The lead time will be 18 months. Klaus did not even try to negotiate. He simply nodded. The funds will be wired to your account within 24 hours. The news of the sale did not appear in the financial press. It traveled through more discreet channels. It appeared as a short, cryptic article in a high-end journal for classic car and aviation collectors, a publication read by a tiny but incredibly wealthy demographic. The article, titled "The Ghost of Aerodyne," spoke of a legendary prototype engine, long thought lost, that had been resurrected and perfected by an anonymous master engineer. It mentioned a record-breaking private sale to a discerning European collector. It did not name Elias Vance or his company, but it provided just enough detail for those in the know to connect the dots. The article was forwarded to Evelyn Reed by a board member with a passion for vintage aircraft. The email subject was simply, "Isn't this the junk you wrote off last year?" Evelyn read the article, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She saw the power figures, the mention of a unique magnesium alloy, the connection to the defunct Aerodyne dynamics. It was all vague, but it was enough to trigger a faint, unpleasant memory. She pulled up the file for Lot 7G. She remembered the dismissive sale, the $1,000 check. She had celebrated it as a small victory, a clever way to avoid a $100,000 demolition bill. "Marcus," she said into her intercom, her voice dangerously calm. "Get in here. Now." Marcus Thorne entered her office. He had been promoted since the sale of Lot 7G, a reward for his efficiency. He saw the look on Evelyn's face and felt an immediate sense of dread. She slid her tablet across the desk. "Read this." Marcus read the article. The blood drained from his face. He remembered the quiet men with the calloused hands. He remembered the name on the paperwork, Vance Precision. He remembered the feeling of profound unease he had felt as the men walked out of the conference room. "Find out who this anonymous engineer is," Evelyn commanded, her voice like ice. "Find out where this workshop is. Trace the sale of Lot 7G. I want to know everything. I want to know how we sold a multi-million-dollar asset for $1,000. And I want the name of the junior legal associate who approved the transfer documents without a full inventory or IP exclusion clause. He's fired." It took Marcus less than a day to uncover the devastating truth. The shell company, Vance Precision, was registered to one Elias Vance. A quick search of old Aerodyne personnel files revealed the name. Elias Vance, former lead systems engineer, the genius behind their most advanced projects. The address for Lot 7G was now the registered address of Vance Precision. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They hadn't sold a derelict building full of junk. They had sold a national treasure to the one man on Earth who knew its true value, the men who had created it. Marcus prepared a report, his hands shaking slightly as he typed. The estimated value of the equipment alone was over $3 million. The intellectual property for the Peregrine engine was, by any reasonable metric, priceless. The $6 million sale was just the beginning. Vance now had confirmed orders for 2 more, with rumors of interest from a bespoke hypercar manufacturer and a defense contractor developing high-altitude drones. The potential value was not $6 million, it was in the hundreds of millions. He walked into Evelyn's office and placed the report on her desk without a word. She read it, her face a mask of controlled fury. The color rose in her cheeks. She did not shout. Her anger was cold, a white-hot, silent rage. She had built her career on flawless execution, on seeing value where others did not. And here, in her own portfolio, had been a winning lottery ticket, and she had not only thrown it away, she had paid someone $1,000 to take it off her hands. The humiliation was a physical pain, far worse than the financial loss. "Get him on the phone," she ordered. "Set up a meeting. I want to see him." At his workshop, she wanted to see the place. She needed to stand in the space where her greatest miscalculation had occurred. The meeting was set for the following week. Evelyn Reed's black town car, a silent, imposing vessel of corporate power, looked profoundly out of place parked on the cracked asphalt of the industrial park. She stepped out, Marcus trailing behind her like a pallbearer. She wore a severe, dark gray suit, an attempt to project an authority she no longer felt. Elias Vance met them at the door. He wore the same simple work clothes he had worn to their first meeting. He did not offer to shake her hand. He simply held the door open and led them inside. The interior of the workshop was a shock to Evelyn. She had expected grime, clutter, a salvage yard. Instead, she saw a space that was cleaner and more organized than her own company's research labs. The air smelled of clean oil and purpose. The resurrected machines gleamed under the bright lights. And in the center of it all, on a pristine assembly table, were the components of the next P-12S engine, laid out with surgical precision. The scene radiated a quiet, profound competence that was a direct rebuke to everything she represented. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice tight. "You have been very resourceful." Elias did not respond. He simply waited, his gaze calm and steady. He was on his home turf. He held all the power, and they both knew it. "My company made an error," she continued, the words tasting like poison. "A clerical oversight. The contents of this facility, specifically the prototype and its associated intellectual property, were never intended to be part of the sale." Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority in the large space. "The contract you signed says otherwise. As is, where is, contents included, your legal team was very clear on that point." Marcus flinched at the mention of the legal team. The junior associate had been fired that morning, a pathetic and meaningless sacrifice. "We are prepared to be generous," Evelyn said, shifting tactics. "We will buy the company back from you." Vance Precision. "We will pay you $5 million. A handsome profit on your $1,000 investment." She tried to make it sound like a magnanimous offer, a return to the natural order of things. Elias almost smiled. It was a faint, fleeting thing, gone as quickly as it appeared. "You are offering me $5 million for a company with a confirmed order book of $20 million and assets worth significantly more. That is not a generous offer." Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "What do you want, Vance? A partnership? Do you want to be a supplier? We can make you our exclusive provider of high-performance engine components. We can give you more business than you can imagine." Elias walked over to the assembly table and picked up a polished crankshaft. He ran his hand along its perfectly balanced surface. "I don't want your business," he said, his voice still quiet, but now with an edge of finality. "I already have a business. I have my work. I have my team. I have everything I need." He looked past her, toward the office where he could see Lily doing her homework. "This company you threw away, it allows me to be here for my daughter. It allows me to do work that I believe in, without compromise. You can't put a price on that. Your money has no value here." The statement hung in the air, an indictment of her entire world. Her power, her wealth, her influence, it was all useless here. She was a foreigner in a land where the currency was skill, patience, and integrity. She had been defeated, not by a rival corporation, but by a quiet man in a flannel shirt who had simply refused to be insignificant. She turned without another word and walked out of the workshop, her posture rigid with a humiliation that would follow her for the rest of her career. Marcus gave Elias a final, brief look, a look of respect and regret, before following his boss out into the fading afternoon light. Elias watched them go. He did not feel a sense of triumph, only a quiet, settled peace. He had not sought revenge. He had simply built something true from the rubble of what others had discarded. He placed the crankshaft back on the table and walked toward the office. Lily looked up from her math homework. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked. He smiled, a real, warm smile this time. "Everything is perfect," he said. The business grew, but on Elias's terms. Vance Precision never expanded beyond the one workshop. They never hired a sales team. They took on only a handful of clients who understood and valued the uncompromising quality of their work. They became a legend in the world of high-performance engineering, a place where impossible problems were solved with quiet, methodical brilliance. A year later, a simple, elegant sign was installed above the workshop's main door. It was made of brushed aluminum, with letters cut with the same precision as their engine parts. It said, simply, Vance Precision. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was a statement of fact. Elias Vance remained unchanged. He still wore flannel shirts. He still drove his old truck. He still found his greatest satisfaction not in the balance of his bank account, but in the perfect fit of a well-machined part. His success had not altered him because his core values were forged from something stronger than money. They were built on the love for his daughter, the integrity of his work, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. In a world that screamed for attention, he had found his power in the silence, proving that true value is not what is loudly claimed, but what is quietly and meticulously built.